Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this week's Torah lesson on Kin's Zoom classes. And this week's lesson is Parashat Vayishlach. Now, we know that Yaakov Avinu had returned in last week's Parsha. Yaakov Avinu returned back to Eretz Yisrael after his 22 years in Lavan's house, escaping Lavan's grasp, so to speak. And then he at the very end, he made a pact with Lavan, and each went his own special way. Yaakov Avinu now returns to Eretz Yisrael, and the somewhat intimidating and difficult task of attempting to peacefully meet with his brother Esav. Chazal tells us that there's a machlok that's really on the parsha of Vayishlach Yaakov Malachim Lifanav. Yaakov sent Malachim. Were these angels or were these humans? Rashi, that particular question we know is dealt with in the Midrashim and in the Gemara. It's come to the conclusion, at least in the Medrash Rabbah, in the Tanchuma, that in fact he sent real malachim, extraterrestrial angels, to Asa, because according to some other midrashim, according to them, he couldn't send people because people were completely intimidated by Esau. So Yaakov sent. Rashi assumes that in fact that they were malachim, and that as the Tanchuma says, it wouldn't be such a question about whether he should send malachim or not send malachim, meaning to say angels, because Yaakov's whole life, as I mentioned last week, was the transition between angels and stones, navigating between the material world, which is represented over and over again in Yaakov's life by and through stones, the material elements of his life and the world, and then of course he had experienced in last week's parsha, this week's parsha, and in future parshiot, malachim as angels. And so therefore either of those two views can find at least its support as to whether he sent people or he sent angels. Rashi goes out of his way to say malachim mamash. Okay, he was able to and did send malachim. He sent angels to Esav, and of course we find that Esav returns he meets with the messengers that Yaakov Avinu sent. They then come back to Yaakov Avinu and they tell him that Esav is coming with 400 men. Not usually you don't assume that somebody comes with 400 men purely to reestablish connections. He doesn't need 400 men to reestablish connections, and this, of course, sent shivers in Yaakov Avinu's spine. Actually, that the last thing he knew, Esav wanted to kill him, and now he's coming with 400 men, which are not necessarily a standard peace party. And therefore, the Torah tells us at the very beginning of the parsha, when Yaakov hears this, Vayira Yaakov Ma'od Vayetzer. Yaakov then was overcome with fear, Vayetzer lo, and he was distressed. Now, usually fear is an emotion, a state of mind that usually comes up whenever there is great uncertainty. When the more uncertain one is about the future, whether the immediate future or long-range future, that is the level that determines the level of fear or anxiety that one has. And of course, if there is relatively little uncertainty, or the uncertainty is not about something which is earth-shattering, so they're not afraid. But here the Torah testifies, Vayira Yaakov ma'od vayetzer lo. He was in fact afraid of the uncertainty of the immediate in the immediate future, and he was also troubled. He was also troubled by in the future what will be. Rashi says those two verbs actually represent two separate types of anxiety. One is, as Rashi says, Vayira Yaakov ma'od. Yaakov was afraid, the uncertainty that he may die. Vayetzer lo, Shema Yarog Acherim. Maybe he will have to kill other people who do not share Esav's hatred, but they're just going along with Esav, and they are not looking to kill Yaakov. They're following orders, and therefore those people really should not come under the general dictum of Habal L'Horcha Hashkem L'Horgo. If somebody comes with the intent of killing you, you are entitled to, and not only that, you probably it's incumbent upon you to kill them first. But as some of fortune tell us, that doesn't entitle you just to kill wantonly. It entitles you to protect yourself. You may injure them if you can. If you have to kill them, then you can. But or maybe you must. That could be too. But if their intent is not to kill you, but rather they're just there, they are bystanders, so to speak. So therefore, you don't have that right. So therefore, Rashi was distressed at the thought that he might have to kill innocent people or people who weren't so guilty. The Malbim says to us that he doesn't agree with Rashi. He says the following. Vayira Yaakov ma'od vayetzer lo. Yaakov was very much afraid, vayetzer lo, and he was distressed. Now, why are there two verbs used here? Separate verbs. Rashi says the two verbs simply refer to two sides of the same anxiety. I might have to kill. I might be killed, and I might have to kill somebody else. To Yaakov Avinu, in the way Avram Avinu looks at it, to Yaakov Avinu, it's indistinguishable. If I have to kill an innocent person, all right, that troubles me, and certainly, of course, I'll be troubled if I will get killed. But the Malbim disagrees in this interpretation. He says, "Hinei aboteach b'Hashem ein lo lira mibasar v'adam." If you are afraid, I mean, if you trust in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you have nothing to fear from people. And Avram and Hashem Yisborach gave the promise, this Havtacha, to Yaakov, that he will return to Eretz Yisrael, he will have children. So what's to be afraid? Vayira mora of the uncertainty. There shouldn't be uncertainty, says the Malbim. If there's no uncertainty, then there's no reason to fear. And since Hashem, who is in charge of everything, has already promised him, what's he afraid of? So the Malbim actually invokes a phrase which we find fairly often, especially when it comes to promises that Hashem will make to the Avot and Imahot, and it is the idea of Shema Yigrom Achet. Hashem's promise is based upon the reality of today. But if a person at a later time or between the fulfillment of the promise and the statement of the promise, if that person does something which is reprehensible or wrong or very wrong, that will affect the promise. So therefore, Shema, and that's called Shema Yigrom Achet. Perhaps Shema Yigrom Achet. Perhaps the sin which may have been done in the meantime between the initiating of the promise and the fulfillment of the promise. If the person who is the recipient of that promise does something which is wrong or egregious, then it can nullify it in all or in part. So Yaakov knew that. So Yaakov's fear is that if he kills people, even somewhat inadvertently, now maybe then he will no longer be entitled to see the fulfillment of the havtacha that Hashem has promised. And that's the Malbim's view. So he differs with Rashi. Now, the 15th century thinker and great expositor of Torah, Abravanel, ignores the Vayira Yaakov Ma'od Vayishlach. He ignores for the purpose of his commentary ignores the two verbs. Rashi says the two verbs represent two separate fears. I might be killed, I have to kill somebody else. Two separate issues. But the Malbim says, no, it's one issue. The issue, says the Malbim, is a lack of concrete bitachon in Hashem's promise. And because of that, Vayetzer, he was distressed. He was afraid, and therefore he was distressed. So according to this, the second verb is the result of the first verb. His fear, Yaakov's fear, leads to the distress of the moral crime, and therefore B is really an extension of A. The logical conclusion or the logical result of the flawed bitachon. Now, Abravanel says, the truth is, every soldier going into battle, knowing full well that he could die, presumes, and if he's a person of valor, if he is truly a courageous person, so he will be willing to choose the virtuous death over a cowardly life. And so therefore, but he's still afraid. He is afraid of death. He knows that death could be right around the corner. But because he chooses virtue to fight for something which is valuable and good, he then engages in that conduct, which will lead possibly to death, and to the death even of innocent people as well. So that's what Abravanel says. And Abravanel says, don't say that a person who trusts in a Kadosh Baruch Hu will in no way have any fear. Fear is natural. That's implanted within the human being. So it's not even something over which he has control. He can manage his fear. Yes, you can manage your fear, but not to fear, not to have that emotional state of mind in which you know that tomorrow you may not exist anymore. That, says Abravanel, that is what makes a person virtuous. And he gives an example. He says, what happens if you have a person who's a wonderful guy and he throws money around? He's wealthy. He's wealthy, but he has no concept of money. Maybe he grew up in a home where he never had to ask for anything, never had to work for anything. He's got an endless amount of money. So if he decides he's going to give $100,000 to Paws, so to speak, which is the animal fund, the fund to protect animals, he's going to give $100,000, and he has no concept of money. So the Malbim says, so the Abravanel says, that's not a philanthropist. That's a fool. He has no idea what the value of money. It's only when you value something and then give it up, that constitutes, for others, that constitutes virtue. And so therefore, every soldier who goes in, certainly every Jewish soldier, and anybody who fights for a noble cause, when the night before battle they're afraid, and the fact that they go into battle and engage in it for the purpose of attaining a noble goal or cause, that is what makes that person virtuous. That act is an act of virtue. And so therefore, we have a machloket between Rashi and, between Malbim and Abravanel. Malbim says the only true virtue is the virtue of knowing that Hashem has given you a promise, and therefore you have no fear. Hashem li lo ira. We say that every night, and in mornings too. But we certainly say it before we go to bed. Hashem li lo ira, lo ira. I will not be afraid. Why? Because Hashem is with me. That is the position of the Malbim. On the other hand, Abravanel says that's not true. That's not even realistic. Abravanel says, and by the way, he quotes Aristotle, when Aristotle says, on the night prior to a battle, everybody's afraid. If they don't know death is around the corner, then they're fools. That's not virtue. That's not virtue. So that's the difference between the two. Now, many years ago, when I saw this magnificent machloket about a human being and how we deal with fear, which is fear is an emotion attached to the anxiety about the unknown. That's what fear is. Just about all fear is anxiety about the unknown. Could be physical unknown, or it could be moral, whatever it may be. That's what it is. Right? It could be. I looked it up in two different dictionaries. One dictionary said, I actually want to see what the dictionaries say about courage, because we could maybe transfer it over to faith. So it said, courage is the state of mind by which one enters into a situation of danger and uncertainty without fear. Then I looked at other dictionaries, and another view is it is the state of mind by which a person enters into a dangerous situation and overcomes the fear. So here you have, of course, right here you have the machloket between Abravanel and Abravanel and the Malbim. If we transfer it over to faith, of course there are differences too, but there are enough similarities that we can actually draw that conclusion. And so Abravanel would say, no, the true person of valor is one who overcomes his fear to do the right thing. And Malbim says, no, if Hashem has promised you something, so then you should have no fear. According to Abravanel, fear is a necessary component of courage and faith. According to the Malbim, fear and faith or fear and courage are antithetical. The more fear you have, the less bitachon you have, and especially when Hashem gives you a promise. So that's what we're looking at. I just want to conclude with a beautiful statement. And again, I always urge people, get great books, especially in English. Great books by great people. Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, Zecher Tzaddik B'Vracha, as well. These essays of Rabbi Sacks are magnificent, and they really talk to us, to people, Western minds thinking that way, in a beautiful, of course, a poetic, lyrical English, very beautiful. So he tells the story of Rabbi Sacks, of Yitzchak Rabin, Zichrono Livracha, who was the chief of staff of Tzahal in the 6-Day War, when they were completely surrounded by individuals who wanted to kill us, Egypt and Jordan and Syria, and the whole lot of them. And of course, the strategy for the war, the courage of the soldiers and of the administration and of the those who are in charge of strategy ended up, of course, with the 6-day war, which Hashem graciously granted us victory. So in this, Rabin makes the following statement: it may be that the Jewish people has never learned or accustomed itself to feel the triumph of conquest and victory. That, of course, is Rashi. That Rashi says you can't feel the exhilaration of victory. You killed people. Maybe it was necessary. Something else. But to be able to say that we will have triumph and everything else that is associated with victory, he says, therefore we receive victory with mixed feelings. Yes, we did what we had to do. Thank you, Hashem, that you gave me victory. But dancing around and rejoicing in the killing of people, no. And then Rabbi Sachs answers, and Rabbi Sachs then adds to this: these mixed feelings were born thousands of years earlier, when Jacob, father of the Jewish people, experienced not only the physical fear of defeat, that's Vayira, but the moral distress, a more intense feeling of anxiety, the moral distress of victory, because morality has to do with what kind of a human being. Victory in terms of physical, well, that means I'll live longer, all right? But victory, but the distress of killing people, even though it's justified, 100% justified. Chas v'shalom, I'm not even for a moment saying that what is going on right now is not justified. It is, but it's not something that we dance over. Okay? The distress of victory. Only those who are capable of feeling both, namely the fear of defeat and the distress, the moral distress of victory, only those people can defend their bodies without endangering their souls. And only Rabbi Sachs can put it. So wish everybody a good Shabbos, and Mir Hashem, we will see you next week when the Parsha coming up. We're closer and closer to Hanukkah. Erev Tov.